Good morning, Connecting Point family. It is Friday, which means it is once again the day that I have the opportunity to share some devotional thoughts with you guys based on our Following Jesus Bible reading plan from YouVersion. Just as a quick reminder, we this last Sunday had the opportunity to gather together for the first time in a couple of months now. And it was pretty awesome. And we're going to be able to do that again this week. We are going to have this opportunity to, once again at 9 o'clock a.m., bring our lawn chairs out and meet out on the Grass Worship Center and come together as the people of God to glorify God. And that is pretty exciting. And so I do hope to see you guys. I'm looking forward to seeing you guys in a couple of days. Where we can just come together and as one honor our Heavenly Father together. But until that time, again, I have this opportunity to share some thoughts on our devotions for today. And we had a reading from 2 Samuel and some Proverbs, and then as well as Acts. And so the thing that stuck out to me today came out of Acts. There's a few things that stuck out to me, but the thing that I would really like to discuss are a couple of pieces here found in Acts chapter 8. Our reading today was 8:4 through 40, but there's a little bit of context that I want to bring in from yesterday's reading on the 8:1 to 3 verses out of Acts. And so two kind of main observations, one that leads to the other. One that's a little bit more like snapshot of like, this is where we are. And then the other, so out of where we are, what is our place in the midst of it? And so here in the 8th chapter of Acts, we read this statement that on that day, a great persecution broke out against the church in Jerusalem, and all except the apostles were scattered throughout Judea and Samaria. So all of these Christians, so we are now 8 chapters into Acts, right? And earlier on in the first couple of chapters of Acts, we have Pentecost, and we have these other stories of just huge amounts of people coming to faith in Christ and becoming Christians. And this is a movement, a major movement that's taking place in the rather localized place of Jerusalem. And this is an incredible place to be during this time. It's a huge, exciting thing that's occurring. And then here in chapter 8, we see that this persecution breaks out. And as a result of the persecution, the church goes from being the church that is kind of localized and in a more focused area to the church that is scattered, to the church that goes everywhere else but, right? To the church that is everywhere but Jerusalem. I guess that's not necessarily the truest statement to make, because the church still existed in Jerusalem. It says that the apostles were still there, and others were as well, but this thousands of people that have been building, that have been accepting Christ, that have been stepping into the Christian faith, many of them now find themselves moving from Jerusalem out into the far reaches and throughout Judea and Samaria. And so they move from the church localized to the church scattered. It says in verse 4, so today's reading, that those who had been scattered preached the word wherever they went. And so these people who were initially all focused in Jerusalem, who were sitting under the teaching of the apostles, who were kind of just eating up everything that was being given to them, spiritually speaking, were now kind of set loose and turned out. And instead of them seeking to continue to be fed necessarily elsewhere, the first thing that is said is that they preached the word wherever they went. And so it didn't matter what town they rolled into. It didn't matter what situation they found themselves in. They preached the word wherever they went, which is pretty stinking incredible. And the thing I think that speaks to us today is I think that we find ourselves, granted, it changed this last week, right, when we were able to come together. But I think that we as a church can find ourselves in a very similar situation. I must say, I am not saying that we are the persecuted church. Please understand that. The persecuted church is a reality throughout the world. I do not believe the persecuted church is a reality for those of us who are gathered here on Monavista and Waring. I'm just going to be honest with you. I do think that as a result of the guidelines that have been handed to us by the state and by our county, we have found ourselves in a place where we have moved from being the church in a localized place to the church scattered. Again, not because of persecution, but because of guidelines in response to a world pandemic. We find ourselves in the same position as these early believers found themselves in. And so now the question is, what are we going to do with that? Like, how are we going to respond? How have we been responding? How should have we been responding? And how are we going to respond going forward? And so this piece really stuck out to me because it really challenged me, because it talks about, so these people, these believers are scattered. Nowhere in here does it say that from the moment they were scattered, they began to seek every possible opportunity to get back to Jerusalem. They scattered, they recognized that this was the reality going forward, and they just journeyed. They went, and wherever they went, they preached the gospel. That is exciting. That is exciting. And so for us, while, again, I want to be careful because I'm not trying to speak against us being together whatsoever. I think that, again, what happened this past Sunday was incredible. Our opportunity to gather as one and to worship was an incredible opportunity. But we need to recognize that that is not what defines us as the church. And I think I've kind of talked about that previously in some of my devotionals. And so we find ourselves with a unique opportunity because instead of being the church localized, like the church localized on every Sunday morning and Sunday evening for prayer and Monday night for prayers and Wednesday for Bible study, we have an opportunity right now, again, not through persecution, but through guidelines that have been handed out to us because of our response to the care for those around us. We have this opportunity to behave very, very much so like the early Christians did as the church scattered, and use these opportunities wherever we go, many of us in our own neighborhoods, for more time than we ever have been in the past. We're finding ourselves in our communities with more free time than we've ever found ourselves with in the past. And so we have this opportunity to, wherever we go, share the good news of the gospel, which is incredible. But the question becomes, what have we done with this time, right? It's been 3 months. What have we done with this time? Have we done what God has asked of us to do? Have we done what these early believers did? Have we taken advantage of this opportunity to, as the people of God scattered, preach the word wherever we went? That's something that I felt like God was kind of coming to me, not necessarily for me to ask you, but for me to ask myself. And because I'm asking myself that now, I am asking you to ask yourself the same question. I can't answer it for you. So that's the first piece that stuck out to me. And the second piece that stuck out to me, like I said, is very much so related back to this first piece. And so this is where we are. We find ourselves in this place of being the church scattered. Again, not because of persecution, but because of guidelines, right? We find ourselves in this position of being the church scattered. And so now, what is our response? What does it look like for us? And I think that the story of Philip and the Ethiopian gives us a prime example and a prime kind of model to follow after on what it looks like to live in the midst of, to thrive, not just live, not just survive, but to thrive in the midst of this whole being scattered thing. And so there are two things that really stuck out to me in this Philip and the Ethiopian story. The first one is that Philip was attentive he heard, right? He was attentive enough to the Spirit. He heard the Spirit say, go to that chariot and stay near it. Okay? So he heard the Spirit, but not only did he hear the Spirit, he didn't just hear the Spirit's leading, but he heeded the Spirit's leading, and he actually went to the chariot and journeyed alongside of it. He journeyed alongside this Ethiopian, and that is it. That is what he did. Okay? Spirit says, go journey next to the chariot. Philip goes and journeys next to the chariot. Okay? Stays near it, right? That's the exact words. Go to that chariot and stay near it. Okay? So, as he is near the chariot, he hears that the Ethiopian inside of it is reading from the prophet Isaiah, and he just journeys. He doesn't immediately go, oh, I know a lot about that book. Let me tell you about it. He just journeys, and he's listening to what the Ethiopian is reading. And then, at a certain point in time, for us, it's, near verse 34. We don't really know how much time has passed. But at a point in time, the Ethiopian eunuch looks down and says, what's this saying? What is this saying to me? And Philip, which I think is just as important as him hearing and heeding the leading of the Spirit, Philip is prepared to answer the question of the Ethiopian, not with his own wisdom, but with an answer that is centered and focused on Christ and Christ alone. With an answer that points to the gospel. And so as I read this, I found myself very challenged and asking myself again the question of, is this where I am? Do I find myself, first of all, do I hear and heed the Spirit as Philip did? I think I would like to say that I do, but as I read this, I did find myself asking, is there places where I have missed it? Is there places where I have missed it? Is there places where I am currently not missing it, right? Not just past tense, but is there places where I am currently missing it actively? And so maybe that's the first question we need to ask ourselves about this second section is, Lord, have I missed it, or am I missing it right now? Is there something that I'm missing that I need you to draw me back to open my eyes to? Is there someone I am missing right now? And then this other piece that really stuck out to me is, here's the deal. When it comes to evangelism, guys, I have often found myself very frustrated with the return. And maybe that sounds like a very American way to frame it, but I very frequently, if you just go out and you just start preaching the good news of the gospel, the response is not that staggering. You don't see what you see in Acts, where thousands are being added to the church daily because of the proclamation of the good news of the gospel. And that can be depressing, and that can be frustrating. But I think that there was a piece in this story with the Ethiopian that maybe can point to a simple truth, a simple reality in the midst of evangelism. Oftentimes, I recognize, I'm going to frame it in these words. I believe that the story that we tell in evangelism is the answer. Unfortunately, many times when I am speaking in the midst of evangelism, when I am trying to give people the answer that they so desperately need, I recognize the problem is they're not asking the question. And so while I will never speak down of being bold in the gospel message and just proclaiming it, I think that is something we should do. I mean, you just look at the beginning of chapter 8 and it says that was happening. So while I'm never going to speak against that, I do think that there is a piece to this story of Philip and the Ethiopian that we regularly kind of miss. And that is that it wasn't that Philip said the right words necessarily. I think he did. But before Philip was able to say the right words, that ultimately led to the Ethiopian's excited response, like overwhelming response to the gospel, so much so that immediately when he saw a body of water, he said, "We've got to stop so I can be baptized." The thing that led to that was actually the Ethiopian's question of, what does this mean? And so as I think about this entire passage, as I think about these two separate points, this where the church finds itself as the church scattered, again, because of guidelines, not because of persecution, and then this reality of Philip being called to journey with the Ethiopian, and then in response to Philip's journeying with the Ethiopian, he is opened up to the opportunity to hear the question of the Ethiopian and then respond to that question with a gospel-centered answer. I can't help but kind of see my life in the midst of this and recognize that as I find myself as a member of the church scattered today with more opportunity in my neighborhood and in my community than I have ever had before, God is calling me to journey with my neighbors. God is calling me to spend more time with them and be near to them in the ways that I can. And then as I am journeying, as I am being near to them, I am to live a life after Christ, right? I in no way am I saying that we just simply say hi and talk with them and then do as the world would do. No. As we're spending time with them, we are still called to be the people of Christ or people of God that we are, right? But as we are living out this life of the people of God, of our identity, we need to make sure that we are ready, that when the question comes, because I do believe the question will come. If we are intentional about spending time with those that God has placed us near, which in this story of Acts, I believe that God had placed Philip in the area of this Ethiopian. And I truly believe that God has placed each and every single one of us in the area of our neighborhoods to be the light in our neighborhoods. And so if we recognize that we have been placed there by God, and now we have been opened up with the opportunity to be present in the midst of our neighbors, I believe we need to be ready for God to open up the opportunity for them to be asking the question and us to be providing the answer that is a Christ-centered answer that will point them back to Jesus. So we have this task. And I ask each and every single one of you today, just as I am doing, I ask you, would you wholeheartedly be seeking God right now? Would you be asking, Lord, who would you have me journey next to? Not just one, not just two, maybe a handful of people. I don't know, Lord. What would you have me do? What does that look like? God, would you help me to take advantage of these opportunities that we have today? And then, Lord, would you also help me to be prepared to respond in a gospel-centered way when the opportunity arrives? Well, I look forward to seeing each and every one of you guys in a couple of days here when we do have the opportunity to gather. But I want to remind you guys that as the church scattered, we have a very, very great responsibility to the world around us. And we have a very, 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 very great opportunity to see a lot more stories like this story of Philip and the Ethiopian in our community today as a direct result of the time that we find ourselves in. Hope you guys have a good rest of your day. Talk to you later. Peace out.